This is the Talking Shit podcast. I am Dr. Evil Genius.
And I am Captain Paul. Welcome to this episode. How have you been
Episode
here, Evil?
21.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'm enjoying a lot of that summer heat
Ugh.
that a lot of people are suffering in. But what they say, one person's heat wave is another person's, I don't know, bundle of happiness, bundle of joy. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm not suffering the way a lot of people are suffering in the swelter. So, yeah, I'm,
Lucky bastard.
yeah, but then in the wintertime, I'm the guy that's like super suffering. So,
Dude, that's where my people belong in the winter. Just it's
so
beautiful out.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's
Well,
how we do it.
man,
Uh,
so it's good you enjoyed the heat wave. I had a pretty good weekend
Bon
actually.
Boone is in the building. I just realized that um, Bon Boone wasn't there for the MMA watch party, but Bon Boone is here for the actual podcast. So
There we go.
we'll definitely take it. We'll definitely take it.
Yeah, man. But yeah, I had a good weekend. My girl actually surprised me with a surprise party. I had
Oh,
no idea about it.
I thought she surprised you with
Oh,
some sloppy toppy.
yeah.
But,
You know, yeah, that was also included, but
okay, yeah, because that's the surprise we really care about. I mean,
yeah, yeah, it was a good, it was a very good weekend. I'll just put it that way, man. So it was
okay.
nice to get a little getaway, kind of a little break from the grind, and sweltering heat. The last few days have not been great for me personally, but at least you're enjoying it. I couldn't imagine in New York City because here it's hot, bro, but in the city it's like for whatever. Well, actually, I know because the density, just so
I mean,
much
you're here.
fucking
You're
hotter.
here enough, right?
Yeah, bro. It's like just so much hotter. Like fucking 90 in Rhode Island is like it would be like
The air
110 in the
moves
city.
probably more where you live. The air kind of stagnates here a little bit.
Oh no, bro, you bake it. It's like it's insane. It's fuck that.
Well, uh, it's funny. I think Bon Boone was around for this one particular episode. We had a Dutch gentleman from across the pond who brought up George Floyd during the MMA broadcast, and
Mm.
they had a lot to say, and none of it was accurate. But one of the things that I noticed is that it was totally devoid of human compassion, and so I knew that we were going to eventually mention these issues on the show.
Yeah,
I
it's
knew
one of the
that we
main.
would eventually.
This is one of the main. These are like the conversations we had about these type of incidents were one of the main reasons why we started this show because we
Right.
had like good long conversations on the phone about it, and there's a dialogue to be had there. It's unfortunate someone would be spreading either false or misleading narratives, but unfortunately, in the era we live right now, there's a lot of, I hate to say it, a lot of fake news. I'm
Right.
sorry. I cringe when I say that, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of that, man. There's a lot of misleading, and if you want to have a particular take on a topic, it's very easy to stay in your certain lane, your echo chamber, and
Mm-hmm.
just believe that to be right. It's unfortunate. So with so much technology, information at our fingertips, we're no longer looking to be right. We're just looking to be. We're no longer looking for the correct answer. We're just looking to be proven that we are correct.
Or that to show what team we're playing for, so to
Exactly,
speak.
exactly.
Yeah, I have to. I can't. Um, I guess and again, I think one of the things that we've done on this channel is that we swore that we would not attack people, but what
Hmm.
we would do is we would attack ideologies, and we would attack them based upon the facts and kind of stay away from the feeling, so to speak. Okay.
Hmm.
So one of the things that came across my Google feed was the sentencing memo from Judge Peter Cahill.
Hmm.
Peter Cahill was the judge during the trial, and a lot of people believed that either he would cave to whatever the conservatives wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and then the conservatives thought that they would cave to what the left wanted. But I thought it was very interesting what the judge actually said, and the very meticulous approach to the justification of the sentencing of 270 months, or 22.5 years in prison for the crime that he committed. Okay? So, we want to, we're going to look at this article from MSNBC. I understand they're considered to be left-leaning or whatever, but what they put here was simply what the judge wrote. So there really is no conjecture or what team you're playing for, or any of this bullshit, or what gang signs you throw up, or what color flag you wear. I understand that they're supposed to wear the blue flag, and the conservatives are supposed to wear the red flags like the Bloods, right? I get all of that. But here is just what the judge in this murder trial said. So let's see if I can get this video to play for you guys.
I took the vaccine because it's the right
Audio
thing to
is
do.
coming through.
I am so
Yeah, the
happy
audio, but I don't
that
want
we
this
were
audio
able
to come through.
to get the vaccine.
I mean, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Like,
It should be skip ad, right?
nah, you can't.
Oh my
You
god.
can't skip the goddamn ad.
Time for ad block, son. Except
Vaccine.
no
Yeah,
ad
so
block
I'm
on
gonna
ours.
have to do it eventually.
we
This is
protect
like
ourselves
so
and others.
frustrating.
I was anxious at first to receive
Like-
the vaccine.
I needed
Yo,
to make sure that I had
go
all the
away.
information about the vaccine and the science
Go
behind
away.
it. So I felt it was safe and it was an important
Man, you're gonna
thing to
turn
do.
me into
The
an
vaccine will lead all of us on the
anti-vaxxer.
path.
That was a joke,
Being
folks.
together,
That was a joke.
being
I
as one
swear,
community.
that was a joke.
No, it wasn't.
Mr. Chauvin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 60904, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As
So he
sentenced
won't
for
be
count 1,
sentenced on the other
the
two
court commits
counts.
you to the custody of the Commissioner of
He was
Corrections
guilty of.
for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based
12.5
on
years.
your
For a total
abuse of a
22.5.
position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You are granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages.
Damn, he's got to
You're
pay
prohibited from
$78.
possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And then you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding him. Anything for the defense? No, Your Honor. All right, thank you. We are adjourned.
We always stick
Yeah,
together
that's
because
really
that's what
interesting
families do.
how, God damn it. It's really interesting how, how calm he was, how he, also notice how, he was not immediately cuffed, by the bailiffs or any of the law enforcement that was there. They clearly did not fear him whatsoever. But yeah, I want to talk about the sentencing guidelines because, as I stated previously, there were a lot of assumptions that there was going to be some sort of bullshit from the left or from the right that would have a bearing on the sentencing of Mr. Chauvin. And I very, very carefully read this memo because I'm one of these people that believes in a healthy amount of shame, the kind of shame that would prevent me from running my goddamn mouth without knowing what the fuck I'm talking about. So, you know, we had an older gentleman make some comments here during one of our MMA shows. And it was particularly upsetting to my wife because she paid attention to the trial, not as well as I did, but she knew enough to know that to say that Derek Chauvin is innocent and George Floyd is not deserving of justice or anything like that. And then to tell me that I didn't pay attention to the trial and that I need to get my facts straight. I thought that was pretty rich. Because this person is telling me that Derek Chauvin is innocent, but the jury found him guilty. And now he's been sentenced and he's going to prison. So that's a whole lot for somebody that, according to this guy, was proven innocent. So let's go through some of these sentencing guidelines. The Minnesota sentencing guidelines were promulgated to establish rational and consistent sentencing standards that promote public safety, reduce sentencing disparity, and ensure that the sanctions imposed are proportional to the severity of the offense and the offender's criminal history. So they're making it very clear that they're not just aware of the sensitivity of how they sentence crimes, but they also understand too that we've got a problem with sentencing disparity both along racial lines and along gender lines. There's a lot of data to support the fact that for the same exact offenses, black people get sentenced more harshly for the same exact crime than their white counterparts. Also known is that women are sentenced much more lightly. Men are sentenced much more harshly than women for the exact same crime. Okay? Jimmy Dean says, do y'all think the punishment fits? Well, we're about to go through this right now, Jimmy Dean. We're going to go through this sentencing memo from Judge Peter Cahill of the state of Minnesota. Okay? The presumptive guideline ranges are deemed appropriate for the felonies covered by them. Okay? In most cases, the maximum sentence a district court may impose is the top of the presumptive sentencing range because the sentencing guidelines mandate that district courts pronounce a sentence within the range on the sentencing guidelines grid. Okay? However, the sentencing guidelines recognize there are cases in which the guideline sentence may not be appropriate and therefore allow district courts to depart from the presumptive sentence, although departing courts must articulate substantial and compelling circumstances justifying the departure. Okay? So this actually applies to whether or not you want to impose a sentence that is not as harsh as what the sentencing guidelines would normally require. And it also applies to sentences that go above the recommended range of sentences that that could be given for a particular crime. So in this case, the range was something like 120 to 180 months, with the presumptive sentence being about 150 months, which is 12.5 years. So the judge, Judge Peter Cahill, had the option to sentence him to what most people would get, or somewhere in the range of 120 to 180 months. So, he could have sentenced him to 10 years, could have sentenced him to 12 and a half, could have sentenced to 15 years, could have done any of those things. Okay. But as you can see, if you're on YouTube, you can see this in the description of the stream, that he was sentenced to 22.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why was he sentenced to 10 years longer than the sentencing guidelines would require? Okay. All right. 1 second. Okay. So, substantial and compelling circumstances are those demonstrating that the defendant's conduct in the offense of conviction was significantly more or less serious than typically involved in commission of the crime in question. Okay? So, let's skip some of the stuff. Okay. So, let's take the fraudulent criminal history of Derek Chauvin. And the reason why I say fraudulent is because Derek Chauvin has been cited no less than 17 times for excessive use of force, which, if he did not wear the badge and a gun on his hip, it would just be simply known as felonious assault. So he committed a lot of violent crimes, but under the shielding of being a peace officer in the state of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis. For a defendant like Mr. Chauvin with 0 criminal history points, the guidelines of presumptive range for unintentional second-degree murder, the most serious charge of which Mr. Chauvin was found guilty by the jury and on which he is being convicted and sentenced by this court, is 128 to 180 months, with the presumptive sentence being 150 months. The reason why I say that I know that is because Derek Chauvin was cited 17 times for excessive use of force. So if he did not have the badge and he'd committed those acts without the badge, he would be charged with assault. That's simply what it is. But he was able to, for the most part, get away with that stuff because he had a badge and a gun. Now, the federal government is looking to hold him to account for not just what he did to George Floyd, but also an underage teen back in 2015 for the violations of their civil rights. Derek Chauvin is not off the hook. He's got that 22 and a half years from the state, but he's facing some more very serious charges from the feds. And some of the charges that he is facing have nothing to do with George Floyd. It has to do with some of the other instances of him using excessive force. Yeah, so citation for you and me is different for internal affairs in the police department. So that might be what you're getting.
So
mixed
these
up.
citations, 16 of these complaints were closed without discipline.
Right.
The remaining complaint resulted in 2 letters of reprimand against Chauvin. Right.
But he was still cited for those things. But in the end, he got away with 16 of them, according to Minneapolis Police Department. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Well, apparently some officers have said it's a little unusual to have essentially 1 a year because he was on there for 19 years?
20 something, about 20 something years. I think something like 26 years or something like that.
It just seems like it's kind of hard because the police they won't release the documentation.
Yeah, they don't want really people.
So it's like on this point we are kind of going on conjecture where it's like, okay, like what exactly was the severity of this issue? Was it maybe cuffing too hard, maybe this. I'm not trying to give him a grade. I'm just being honest. We don't necessarily know the severity, or it could have been cases like this where it's just way over the top.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of gainer of like, okay, like this is exactly how it was, but still that's a lot. I know.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that.
I know
because look at what Jimmy Dean said. Jimmy Dean makes a good point here, but the problem is really nobody else on the force had that many complaints, and where there's smoke, there's fire.
Well, like I know stadies that don't for years that had maybe one,
right?
By like it's hard, dude. That's going into an area we're not too sure, but it does show a track.
Right. That's all I'm saying here, right?
Yep.
So that's why I look at this and it says, well, he has 0 criminal history points. Well, how many of those points would he have if he was judged just like the rest of us for the other things that he did? So that's something that I'm putting out there. I think that it's a fraudulent criminal history thing, but the fact of the matter is, whether I believe that he should, that he should be called to account for the other cases that were brought against him in the past, which we know that police departments don't take very seriously.
And to be fair, I think this kind of goes to the heart of a certain issue. I'm not going to completely off topic. Let's bring this up for a second. Is that these issues should be public record, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Because I should know how much that officer is affecting that community, how many reports. It's like, for example, side note, way lesser scale. Like we had a mailman that was just kind of a douchebag for like a year, multiple reports. We had a public record on him and we got him fired. If someone has that many reports on him and you can see like, oh, wait a minute, this is it's kind of weird. Why is this always like a recurring issue with him? Then you could get him removed from the force.
And it's not like Derek Chauvin had a bunch of different complaints from the same handful of guys.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. So yeah, and I agree with you, Jimmy Dean. I agree with you. But I do know that, again, there's nothing that I found that suggested that really any other officer in that department had as many excessive use of force complaints against them as he did. And then when you look at just how callous he was in taking this man's life, he's leaving it up to interpretation how we are looking at those situations, because it is not a matter of public record. If it was, and we're able to look at it case by case by case, maybe he only fucked up on 2 of those 17 occasions. It is possible. But since we don't have access to that information, then the only thing that we have left to go on is the videos that we've seen.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's right. Yeah, I just like to be very careful with.
And you're right,
because it's just, I think then we kind of go into this.
I know it goes into a dangerous area, but I'm just saying for myself when I talk my shit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. When I talk my shit, I look at it and I say, you know what? I look at this and I see a very, very lucky man, because if he was criminally investigated the way we would have been,
right,
then I got to think, how many criminal history points would he have, and what his sentence actually would have, what his sentence been 25 years instead of the 22 and a half. Did he get a gift in those extra 3 years simply because he wasn't investigated the way that we would have been investigated?
Oh, 100%. To be fair, you could kind of put it that way. Like, let's say he has that history.
I agree, Jimmy Dean.
If he had that history of that, right, you could really make that case where it's like, oh, okay, so obviously this shows a bad track record. Let's just be honest. The video kind of spaces it for itself. This guy was too aggressive.
And it calls into question every other time. But even if you don't want to convict them on the other 16 counts.
But this is why cops, for me, honestly, with police departments, they're not doing themselves any favors by hiding information. There needs to be far more transparency, and that's how you gain the trust of your community. Because when you hide behind this wall of anonymity, where you just can't, where you're like, oh, ha, you can't get me.
Yep.
People are just going to look at you in a negative light. Right. So, because like for, my local police department, I'll say this, they're very good about calling out officers on their own bullshit, and they'll just get rid of them. and that's how it should be. If you're gonna be,
and that's why we don't see y'all in
doing-
the national news.
Well, yeah. Well, our community. We were on live PD, and it was funny. Like we actually stopped being on the show because the commissioner was like, "Listen, I'm tired of you idiots hot dogging on fucking camera. You're done. You've shown you don't have the maturity done it," and that's why they got taken off live PD. Because they were kind of like over dramatizing shit that didn't need to be. So like, and apparently some guys got some punishment for it.
Right.
But for me, this just comes down to having more transparency. This should be public record because I should know who I'm having contact with. Just like officers,
a doctor, or somebody
officers,
selling a pair of sneakers.
Well, dude, it's just like officers have like a track record pull from. I should have a track record pull from them on a badge number. Because if it's a very unsafe situation, I should be able to
like they used to do with the professors.
Yep.
They have a website where you can rate your professors, so you can see who you're getting before you even step foot into the class and see what the other students are saying about them.
Mm-hmm. That saved my ass actually a couple times because there was some professors I was like, oh, he's a real D-bag, and I'm like, oh well, shit, I'm not taking that class. But we're getting. I'm not to get off a little point.
Yeah,
but,
you don't want to get off topic.
But like with this sentencing, it was very interesting kind of listening to what the judge said and, you going into the detail of the sentencing with itself is this one particular event. Obviously, there's been others. This one particular event, though, threw us back a lot, like as a country, a whole lot. You know what I'm saying?
I think
like,
the entire world,
with race relations and how things going. Because when you look at that camera and you can try to defend it if you want to, dude, it was like you just wish you could go through the screen and just like choke him out. 'Cause it's like, what are you doing? Like,
just so you can know what it feels like.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing, man? There's no need to have that much excessive force. Like, you already had him, where you wanted, cuff him, right? And yeah, there was some other footage that came out with him. Yeah, well, exactly. You have him cuffed, cuff his legs if you have to, because they do that sometimes with the why, like if that's what you're really fearful of. But it's just it went to an excessive level. It didn't need to go.
Check this out. So we're gonna go through this memo. Another thing I wanted to talk about something that you said about the public record and how that protects the people from the cops. The public record would also protect the cops from the people.
Yep.
Do you remember how upset the cops were when they started mandating body cams? Right?
Oh, furious.
Right? But then we had situations where officers wouldn't turn on the body cams, or they would make these furtive motions so that the body cam would come off their uniform. But there have been times where the body camera saved the officer. I remember there was a viral video happened where this one woman was being arrested by the police officer, and she was trying to back that ass up on the officer and trying to throw the pussy at him, but his body cam made it where the body camera made it where everybody could see that she was the sexual aggressor, and that because the only thing she had to do was make an accusation and say, oh, he touched my butt. But because of that body camera, anything that she would have said would have been proven to be false. So
yep.
Remember, the body cameras, the public record, it doesn't just protect, the everyday citizen. It also protects the officer from, because again, how many of those 17 accusations of excessive force, how many of those were false? It is a good chance that some of them were false. It was just somebody was salty because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And and they weren't allowed to just do what they wanted to do. And now they want to, call their lawyer and all this other stuff, So, all right, so check this out. In the first stage, either a jury or the district court must make a factual finding that there are one or more aggravating factors present in the commission of the crime apart from the prima facie elements of the charged crime. So we're talking about not just the crime committed, right? You can't give them more or less of a sentence based upon the actual crime committed. You have to look at the other elements surrounding the crime to determine whether or not this defendant should be put on probation, as Derek Chauvin's lawyers tried to argue before the court, or, 30 years that the prosecution wanted, which is kind of weird. I'm not used to the prosecution asking for the maximum against a police officer, but, it is what it is. Okay. In the second stage, the district court is required to explain why the presence of any such aggravating factors creates a substantial and compelling reason to impose a sentence outside the presumptive guidelines range. Okay? As to the first stage, at the conclusion of the trial and after the return of the jury's verdicts, Mr. Chauvin agreed to submit the issue of the existence of aggravated sentencing factors to the court for decision. So when I look at that, I just see arrogance. I see arrogance on the part of George Floyd, where he just thinks that, well, no police officers are held accountable, and I'm just going to be one of those that gets away with it. And I think that there was a lot of disbelief on his part. Okay, so the state had urged the court to find the existence of 5 aggravated sentencing factors in light of the evidence presented during the 3-week trial between March 29 and April 15. In the court's verdict and findings of fact regarding aggravated sentencing factors, this court found that the evidence at trial proved beyond a reasonable doubt the following 4 aggravated sentencing factors. So the prosecution asked for 5 and they got 4. So let's quickly try to run down the 5 points, okay? Mr. Chauvin abused a position of trust and authority. Mr. Chauvin treated George Floyd with particular cruelty. Okay, we're going to dive deep into that. Number 3, that children were present during the commission of the offense. Number 4, that Mr. Chauvin committed the crime as a group with the active participation of 3 other individuals. Where was the 5th one? Oh, those are the 4th one. Those are the 4 that they're counting. There was a 5th one, but I'm not seeing the ones that the other one that I think they do mention it later, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Mr. Chauvin and his lawyers asked for probation under the sentencing guidelines. Or alternatively, a downward durational departure from the presumptive guidelines range. The court concludes neither is appropriate in this case. So he really thought that he was going to walk. Oh, I'm just going to get probation. I'm going to make the rounds on Fox News. I'm going to, I'm going to get a bunch of people from the right wingers that hate black people that are going to, give me a lot of money. And I'm going to get a book deal. I'm going to be even richer than I was working that thankless job in the police department. But the court said, no probation here. A mitigated dispositional departure, i.e. probation, is not appropriate because there has been no persuasive showing that Mr. Chauvin is particularly amenable to probation. And because a probationary sentence would be disproportionate and understate the severity of Mr. Chauvin's offense. Okay. So, Mr. Chauvin thought that he was going to get probation because of his age, his lack of criminal history, and the defendant's respectful attitude while in court. Let me ask you this, man. I gotta ask you this.
All right. And don't mind me. I know.
I understand. I gotta ask you. If you murdered somebody,
Word.
do you really think that you was going to be able to go home because you were super respectful during the trial?
I mean, maybe. No, No, like honest, no, dude. Like, no, it's absolutely ridiculous that I don't know what they were thinking. Can I be honest with you when they did that? Like, oh, probation or that? Like, no, dude.
I know what they were thinking.
Absolutely not, because you have video evidence of you staying on top of his neck. Like, I don't. What submission hold do you really need to be on top of someone's neck like that for, like, because
for 9.5 minutes?
It makes no sense, dude. Just like you cuff his legs if you feel like he's going to be like a flight risk, and just done. You know what I mean? And I think it goes, and we can touch upon this later, but the other officers that were just sitting by, standing, watching, I'm like, yo, like, if I know this, if I fucked up in a platoon and I was doing something stupid that I was wrong, another guy would come up, smack me upside the head, like, what the fuck are you doing? And then break it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, even Mario Yamasaki, one of the worst referees to ever referee fights in the UFC, would not have let that submission attempt go on for 9.5 minutes.
No, it's just, it's absurdity that it shouldn't even got to that point, right? That's where I'm kind of like beyond, like, I don't know how you could understand, but like probation, bro. Like, are you high? Like, I don't, like, that's a special type of, like, oh, I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing type shit. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I guess the problem is that people, maybe he just thought that because he was behind that cover of, being out, of the badge, maybe he thought he had some special privileges, but, he got punished, and that, rightfully so, though. It's not like some guy that
but that's not why this guy actually believed he was simply performing his lawful duty in assisting other officers in the arrest of George Floyd. Let's really think about what the video showed. The video showed him mainly because they all crushed that guy for a time, but then the officers got off the guy. He's the only one that stayed on. How are you assisting other officers just by sitting there with your body weight on a man's upper back and neck? Like, how are you assisting them, arresting him, but you're the only one making physical contact with him during the time in question? Okay? He said he was acting in good faith reliance on his own experience as a police officer and the training he had received. Okay? Now, Seed Defense sent memo June 2nd, 2020 at 11 was rejected by every supervisory and training officer of the Minneapolis Police Department who testified as trial, as well as by the jury. This includes Minnesota Police Department Chief Medaria Arredondo, Minneapolis Police Department Sergeants David Pleoger and John Edwards, Minnesota Police Department Lieutenant Johnny Mercel, and Minnesota Police Department Commander Katie Blackwell. So he's saying, well, this is how I was trained, and everybody above him said, you're a fucking liar. Okay? So, Mr. Chauvin's abuse of a position of trust or authority is a substantial and compelling reason for an upward durational departure under the circumstances of this case. Notice how they put this in all caps. They wanted to make sure that people understood this point. The Court of Appeals has held that this aggravating factor supplies a substantial and compelling reason for an upward departure where the defendant and the victim are in a relationship fraught with power imbalances that may make it difficult for a victim to protect himself. And one of the ways that I was able to figure that that was the case is because you had an MMA fighter that could have killed Mr. Chauvin with his bare hands, but he stood there frozen because he knew that there was nothing that he could do to save George Floyd from where George Floyd knew he was going. And the judge also makes mention of that fact further down. There was a senior employee of the Minneapolis Fire Department who she said in her testimony she wanted to provide aid, she wanted to help, but there was nothing she can do. Why? Because of the relationship fraught with power imbalances that may make it difficult for a victim to protect himself. Not only was that victim not able to protect himself, but the other people that wanted to render aid felt powerless to assist him as his life was being salted away. Okay? So this court has already concluded that Mr. Chauvin abused his position of authority by unreasonable force to hold a handcuffed George Floyd in a prone position on the street. A position that the defendant knew from his training and experience carried with it a danger of Mr. Chauvin argues that, well, they didn't, but basically he knew that there was a danger that there could be permanent injury and or death. There's something wrong in how they actually typed this out. The defendant's placement of his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck was an egregious abuse of the authority to subdue and restrain because the prolonged use of this maneuver was employed after George Floyd had already been handcuffed and continued for more than 4.5 minutes after Mr. Floyd had ceased talking and had become unresponsive. Okay? And here's what Jimmy Dean was talking about when he said, and let me go back, when he said, Paul, the others were newbies and did question him. He was the most senior officer on the scene.
Okay, but okay, can we...
Well, no, look, I'm highlighting it for you. Look, Mr. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority by not rendering aid by declining 2 suggestions from one of his fellow officers to place George Floyd on his side and preventing bystanders, including an off-duty Minneapolis firefighter, from assisting.
I get that. But I guess my biggest complaint is, at some point, I'm not saying they're at fault for what he did, but at some point when you notice somebody is doing something incorrect, isn't it damn the procedures and do the right thing?
A lot of people...
And like, because I can speak from experience where I was told, oh, don't do that. Oh, and I just did it anyways because it was the right thing to do.
You know, we had a police officer over here in Buffalo, New York, who was railroaded out of her job and denied her pension because she actually grabbed her fellow officer who was assaulting an underage suspect that was already handcuffed. It was a black woman, too, against a white man, a white fellow officer. And she yanked that man off that kid. And they railroaded her. And then what they did was, after she kept winning appeals to keep her job, they fired her like 2 weeks before she would have made the 20 years necessary to get her pension, her full pension. And they fired her 2 weeks before that. She only just in the last 6 months got what was due to her.
Okay, but...
Over 15 years of that. And she tried to do the right thing.
And I'm sympathetic to that, but I feel like my pension isn't as important to someone's life.
And I get you, man, but the thing
like,
is,
no, and I get it. It's not the best.
They're gonna look out for themselves first.
Yeah, but
they're gonna look out for their own pockets before your life. I mean, I had an argument with one of our viewers last night in the Discord, and their argument was, I understand that 600,000 Americans have died, but what about other people's right to make a living? You understand? Like, there are a lot of people out there that when asked a moral question, if I have to give up my right to make money or your right to live, there is a good amount of Americans that are going to say, better your life than my money.
I guess I just fundamentally don't like when you go into those type of positions, those type of jobs, you're serving your community, and that should become first and foremost. And hopefully that officer in Buffalo kind of, sues or goes through the due.
No, she did. She finally, after over 15 years of dealing with this stuff, she finally had a court rule in her favor to not just give her pension, but all of the back pay that was due to her.
But so essentially,
look at everything that she had to go through.
Yeah, I know, and I don't disagree. But at the end of the day, she got due justice, due process in court.
And another thing you have to understand too, and this is where I'm going to kind of take the side of some of these officers that don't speak up. If you're an officer that speaks up against a fellow officer's wrongdoing, you know what tends to happen? When you radio for assistance, that assistance is about 15 minutes too slow. Those people get beat up in the locker room or assaulted. I've even heard of situations where female officers were raped by their own fellow officers after speaking up about wrongdoing or hazing or bullying or something like that, right? So the thing is that when you're in a legal gang, the gang mentality is still going to exist no matter what, right? So I can see why some officers would be quiet because nobody wants to be known as a rat in any walk of life, be it a legal gang or an illegal gang. Nobody wants to be known as that. But check this out. The number four in this, that failure to render aid became particularly abusive after Mr. Floyd had passed out and was still being restrained in the prone position, with Mr. Chauvin continuing to kneel on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck with one knee and on his back with another knee for more than 2.5 minutes after one of his fellow officers announced he was unable to detect a pulse. Okay? So, I don't know about this Nate the lawyer thing about the Minnesota handbook and the knee thing. And I don't know about all of this. He could have had his knee resting on the back. But when one of your knees is on the back of the neck and the other knee is on the upper back, that's all your weight because you don't have any more knees. There are no more knees.
Yeah, you're like putting your whole body weight into it at that point.
The fact of the matter is, Jimmy, the mob was not unruly. Do you know why? Because if the mob was unruly, Derek Chauvin would have had the shit beat out of him. But all you saw were a bunch of people out with cameras begging the officers to get up off the guy's back, to get off his neck. A Minneapolis police department was begging them. So if the mob was unruly, Derek Chauvin would have been in a fucking coma. So let's just call that what it is. Okay? All right. So, by virtue of his position, he was in a position to dominate and control. From what I understand, the knee on the neck, I think the knee on the back was okay, but the knee on the neck still was not okay. And that's what his superiors testified to at court, that is not how they're trained. That the knee on the neck is not trained. The knee on the back is trained. The knee on the neck, not trained. Okay. Chauvin made a bunch of, bullshit legal arguments. And by Chauvin, I mean his lawyers. And the court found that was bullshit. Okay. They're talking about his position as a police officer or a peace officer or whatever. But for the court, the bottom line was that there was a power discrepancy between George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. And we knew that there was a massive gap because even the other police officers deferred to Derek Chauvin. So even they feared Derek Chauvin, and they had badges too. So imagine a man who was face down with a knee on the back of his neck and a knee on his back, and he's unable to breathe. Imagine that. Okay? So long as the relationship between an officer and the victim qualifies as a relationship fraught with power imbalances that may make it difficult for a victim to protect him or herself. Rourke makes it clear that this aggravating factor can apply. Mr. Chauvin does not suggest otherwise, does not point to any case that forecloses the application of this factor here. So Derek Chauvin's argument that this didn't apply didn't work on the court. So his abuse of trust was a reason in the sentencing enhancement. Okay. Mr. Chauvin's treating George Floyd with particular cruelty is a substantial and compelling reason for an upward durational departure under the circumstances of this case. And this is one of the things that really upset me when I read this. Okay. Yes, my emotions got involved when I read some of the comments. Okay. By the judge. These are comments from the judge. Okay. Xenon is loyal to the platform. I appreciate you. Particular cruelty involves the gratuitous infliction of pain and cruelty of a kind not usually associated with the commission of the offense in question. And the offense in question is second-degree unintentional murder. Here, the cruelty of Mr. Chauvin's conduct was of a kind not usually associated with the commission of the offenses in question. And they cite State of Minnesota versus Shantzen, Minnesota 1981. Okay? This is actual case law, folks. Mr. Chauvin's gratuitous infliction of pain and psychological cruelty justify an upward sentencing departure. Okay? From another case, State v. Norton in Minnesota, 1982. Okay? This court has already concluded that, one, it was particularly cruel to kill George Floyd slowly by inhibiting his ability to breathe when Mr. Floyd had already made it clear he was having trouble breathing, and falsely told the victim they also messed up this they messed this up. But when he told the victim that he basically taunted him by saying, it takes a lot of oxygen to breathe to tell me that you can't breathe. Okay? So some of the transcript is kind of janky, but we'll continue. You were talking about somebody impersonating a police officer. But here's what was typed properly. The prolonged use of the prone position was particularly egregious because George Floyd made it clear he was unable to breathe and expressed the view that he was dying at the office as a result of the officer's restraint. Number 3, Mr. Chauvin manifested his indifference to Mr. Floyd's pleas for his life and his medical distress, among other things, quote, not rendering aid by, quote, declining 2 suggestions from his fellow officers to place George Floyd on his side by preventing bystanders, including an off-duty Minneapolis firefighter, from assisting, by failing himself to render aid even after, quote, after Mr. Floyd had passed out, end quote, and by, quote, continuing to kneel on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck for more than 2.5 minutes after one of his fellow officers announced he was unable to detect a pulse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let that breathe. Marinate on that, folks. Let that breathe. I'm gonna be real with you, Mr. Jimmy Dean, Sausage Man.
Sausage.
There is a very good reason why Derek Chauvin did not testify. Because if he would have got up on that stand and spoke, he would have gotten a 30-year sentence. 2.5 minutes after they were unable to detect a pulse. Number 4, the slow death of George Floyd, occurring over approximately 6 minutes of his positional asphyxia, was particularly cruel in that Mr. Floyd was begging for his life and obviously terrified by the knowledge that he was likely to die, but during which the defendant objectively remained indifferent to Mr. Floyd's pleas. And one of the things that makes me want to cry is when I thought back to what George Floyd said, because I tried everything not to watch that video, but I did hear and I did read that Mr. Floyd was crying out for his mother, his deceased mother. And for all you so-called Christians out there who want to talk about as Jesus was being slowly tortured to death on the torture stake by the Romans, he called out to his father as well when he knew he was about to die.
Mm.
And a lot of these people that think that it was okay for this to happen to George Floyd, a lot of these people that think that was okay, they didn't think it was okay when it happened to Jesus. Not saying that George Floyd was, Jesus Christ.
Let's not make that. I get what you're saying.
But it's that knowing the fact that your mind goes to your mom when you're near death. Because they say when you're about to die, your life starts flashing before your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And we've heard of people kind of having that kind of reaction in near-death experiences. Number 5, restraining George Floyd in the prone position against the hard street surface by kneeling on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck with his other knee in Mr. Floyd's back, all the while holding his handcuffed arms in the fashion the defendant did for more than 9 minutes, is by itself a particularly cruel act. So whether he died or not, the court said that even if he had survived, we have laws in this country against cruel and unusual punishment. And punishment should only come after being found guilty by a jury of your peers, not on the street.
Mm.
Okay? Even then, the court said, you know what? Just what he did was a particularly cruel act in and of itself. So no matter what explanation he tried to use to defend what he did, just the nature of the actions he made, there's no way that you can get away from how particularly cruel it was. Number 6, the prolonged nature as manifested by the extensive video evidence. So there was nothing he was going to be able to say. The video speaks for itself. Okay? These factual findings provide a substantial and compelling basis for an aggravated sentencing departure because they demonstrate Mr. Chauvin's conduct was significantly more serious than typically involved in the commission of the crime in question. Second-degree unintentional murder for those scoring at home. Here, Mr. Chauvin's actions inflicted gratuitous pain by inhibiting George Floyd's ability to breathe when Mr. Floyd had already made it clear he was having trouble breathing, and after he expressed a view he was dying as a result of the officer's restraint. And Mr. Chauvin's actions caused Mr. Floyd significant psychological distress because defendant objectively remained indifferent to his pleas even after Mr. Floyd was begging for his life, obviously terrified by the knowledge that he was likely to die. Everybody, his fellow officers, the bystanders, and the victim in question all knew that he was going to die from what Mr. Chauvin was doing to him. So I don't want to hear from these fucking idiots out there talking about, well, we don't know if that's what killed him. He had fentanyl in his system. He had meth in his system. Everybody around Mr. Chauvin, including the officers who are his co-defendants, everybody, the MMA guy who knows about neck restraints, the off-duty firefighter, the 17-year-old girl who took the main video that everybody watched around the world, the EMTs that came, everybody knew. Oh, and Mr. Floyd himself. Everybody knew that Mr. Floyd was about to die, but I gotta hear about some fucking fentanyl. No, fuck you. That is the definition of gaslighting. Mr. Chauvin's prolonged restraint of Mr. Floyd was also much longer and more painful than the typical scenario in a second-degree or third-degree murder or second-degree manslaughter case. Floyd himself said he couldn't breathe before he was put in handcuffs per the video. Do you think that makes Derek Chauvin look better or worse? If somebody is complaining that they cannot breathe, then your response is to place them face down on the pavement with both of your knees and the full frame of your body weight on the back of the neck and on the upper back where the lungs are located. Because that is where your lungs are located. Your lungs are not located in your chest. Your lungs are located in your back. That's where he had his other knee. So you're saying that a man who is having trouble breathing, what you should do is place him in the prone position and then put your knee on the back of the neck and put your knee on their upper back to make sure that the lungs cannot expand. Because if you put your knee on somebody's back when there's air in it, when they expirate, the lungs collapse. Right? With 200 pounds on your back, your lungs are not going to fill up again. So, yeah. The prolonged nature of the asphyxiation makes this offense different in kind than, for example, a near instantaneous death by gunshot, which is one typical scenario for this type of offense. So what the judge is saying here is Derek Chauvin would have showed more humanity if he would have pulled out his service weapon, cocked it, and put a bullet in his fucking head. That would have been more humane than what he did to him. He probably would have gotten a lesser prison sentence if he would have pulled out his fucking gun and shot him in the fucking head. Let's continue. This shit hurts my heart. Mr. Chauvin's conduct went beyond just inflicting substantial bodily harm. It killed George Floyd slowly over the course of almost 10 minutes by inhibiting his ability to breathe when Mr. Floyd had already made it clear he was having trouble breathing. Indeed, Mr. Chauvin's continuation of the assault after Mr. Floyd was no longer conscious and no longer had a pulse, Mr. Chauvin continued to kneel on the back of Mr. Floyd's neck for more than 2.5 minutes after one of his fellow officers announced he was unable to detect a pulse, plainly sets Mr. Chauvin's conduct apart from the typical case involving a felony assault that results in substantial bodily harm and death to the victim. Now, you wanna have Jimmy Dean. I'm not sure, but I didn't see anything in the post-mortem that suggested that George Floyd ever had a heart attack at all, because they can actually see that in the post-mortem. So I have not seen anything to substantiate a claim of him already having a heart attack at this time. So I cannot speculate on that because that is not part of the public record. Okay. Against the overwhelming weight of the evidence, Mr. Chauvin argues that his conduct was not particularly cruel because the assault of Mr. Floyd occurred in the course of a very short time, and because he contends his conduct involved no threats or taunting. This angers me. This legitimately angers me. Because we all watched this motherfucking video. All of us. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Paul. 9.5 minutes. What would we say is not? What would we classify 9.5 minutes as being a very short time?
Like in what mediums? Like maybe like a YouTube video, relatively. Actually, even that's a little length, but 9.5 minutes is quite a bit long of a time.
Yeah.
Like maybe a short film, but
yeah, short. Okay.
A very short film, but you know, maybe having sex.
No,
like,
a lot of women are happy to get a good 10 minutes.
So
what they don't want is 10 pumps.
Exactly, that's true. But I don't know, man. Like pretty much in any scenario, especially something of that dire, that grave, 9.5 minutes of that type of behavior to me is inexcusable. I just, it's hard to give a guy like this the benefit of the doubt when you've had reports of guys saying, oh, they need to like chill, get off the guy, or you know what I mean, saying officers like that's enough, more than enough force. But it just seemed like for whatever reason, this guy was on a mission to kind of feel like he was on power, like a power trip, right? Like he had.
You might want to check the comments.
Not really. You know, I can send you some videos. I guess.
Do you have anything to clap back at Mr. Jimmy Dean?
I mean, like, you know, I just know that like Jimmy Dean's a pretty small sausage, so.
In the packaging.
Just saying, bro. It's a pretty small sausage. Is all I got to say.
But you were saying?
But like, man, like it just seemed like that dude was on like a power trip, and I feel like he felt invigorated at that time. Like, yeah, man, I'm holding this dude. I'm holding
Like
this
he's
dude
in
down.
control.
Yeah, like it's one of those few times
It's
where
like
he
a
probably
god
felt like
complex.
that.
Like I've got somebody's life in my hands. and
But
I
those,
decide-
but those dudes with that type of ego, in my opinion, don't deserve to be in those positions, anyways. Like you could tell even with the non-provable offenses where it's a gray area, but even that, like that's a track record, bro. Like this dude, like we've all seen that cop that gets pulled over, bro, and he thinks he's the shit, bro. Like, yo, license registration. Don't make me snatch you out this bitch. Like, you know, like some dude that, like, you know, I don't know, is getting
Officer Thunder.
Yeah, yo, I've had cops pull me over with attitude, and I even told them, like, yo, you need to calm the fuck down, bro. Like, I was going 5 over the limit. Like, calm down.
Yeah.
Like, legitimately. So, you know, that's why.
Let's keep it. Let's keep it.
Let's keep it on this. But like, but I think this dude, that's what it was. Power tripping. In the moment, just. I don't know. Maybe
it might show psychopathy here, because if 9.5 minutes of assaulting a person is a very short period of time, what I'm going to infer for that is that he wished that he had more time to continue doing so. If that was to him a very short time, because I want to keep it to the short period of time. When you're talking about assaults and you're talking about time, the situation that comes to my mind is boxing and MMA, right? In boxing, how long are the rounds?
Like, it's what, 2 minutes?
2 or 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Right? In MMA, how long do the rounds go for?
A minute, right? Or something like it's very
5 minutes.
Oh, it's 5 minutes. Okay.
Okay. They cut the fighting where a man actually can defend themselves. They cut it down, because if you look at most fights end in under a minute. Fights don't go on and on and on, because when you've got the fight or flight chemicals flooding, your sympathetic nervous system is going off, and you're in fight or flight. You have an adrenaline dump. It's a lot of energy that your body puts out. So you really can't sustain that kind of pace for very long, which is why most fights are done inside of a minute. And even the professional fighters that train their cardio and all that stuff, you see guys breathing heavy sometimes after the 6 minute mark. They're breathing heavy sometimes. Sometimes before the first round is open, you see them breathing with their mouth open. But here we are, 9.5 minutes. 9.5 minutes. But according to Mr. Chauvin, that was a very short time. Also, he goes and he says, well, there was no threats or taunting. Okay? Now, the court has already concluded that the assault occurred over an inordinate amount of time, that the video evidence at trial, coupled with the trial testimony of medical experts called by the state, demonstrated that Mr. Chauvin's and his fellow officers' actions killed Mr. Floyd slowly, and that the prolonged nature of the asphyxiation was by itself particularly cruel. Although Mr. Chauvin identifies no reason why particular cruelty necessarily requires threat or taunting. So he's basically saying, well, I didn't call him a bitch ass nigga while I was slowly killing him, so it wasn't particularly cruel. What?
Like, that takes a different type of like separation. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, that takes a whole magic world of like separation where it's like, I'm as long as I'm not talking shit, like, yo, get cuffed, bitch, get cuffed. Like, that's like, it's so like, it kind of makes you cringe because it's like, it's just so unself-aware. Like, just lack of self-awareness in that situation. Like, I could get it. Maybe I could even understand in the moment, right? Like, maybe you, for whatever reason, I can't fully understand it, but maybe you just get lost track of time. You're in the moment. adrenaline's pumping, all that shit. But for you to like look back at the tape and look back at the body cam and be like, yeah, bro, like, you know, I don't see any necessarily cruel behavior. I'm like what?
What?
Like, makes no sense. Like, bro, like you're legitimately.
But it makes sense to him,
bro. But this is why certain.
And he was
people,
on the force for over 20 years.
Yo, so certain people. This is why, and we can have a greater discussion another point, right? This is why there needs to be better vetting with police, and after you being in for a certain year, there should be certain evaluations.
Yep. But I'm going to make a correction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make a correction because it was actually Jimmy Dean was correct. I wasn't.
Oh, shit.
According to the state's expert pulmonologist, Dr. Martin Tobin, in his trial testimony, Mr. Floyd likely expired at 8/25/16 from his heart attack resulting from oxygen deprivation caused by the positional and mechanical asphyxia, after which Mr. Chauvin continued to maintain his position for almost an additional 3.5 minutes, kneeling on a dead body, as if he just caught a prize buck while hunting. Okay? So this is why the knee on the back and the knee on the neck is so important, because he was prone. So the positional asphyxia comes from him being placed on his chest. And if you can't expand your rib cage, you can't breathe. And this is something that you guys are going to see when you see Captain Paul trying to learn how to get fit on this channel. You guys are going to see that he is going to struggle when he doesn't breathe properly. If he is in a position, even standing upright, where his internal obliques don't control the position of the bottom of his rib cage, if he ends up in a position like this, he's going to negatively impact his ability to breathe. Just from going from here to here. Now imagine if you have a 200-pound man on your back and you're on your chest. You're laying on your chest, and a 200-pound man on your back, and one of his knees is on your neck, cutting off blood supply. Okay? Buried in sand. Why? Because you cannot expand your rib cage. Check this out. Particularly where Mr. Chauvin objectively remained indifferent to the fact that Mr. Floyd was begging for his life and was obviously terrified by the knowledge that he was likely to die. Because it doesn't take a rocket science to know that if I can't fill my lungs, eventually I'm going to die. The trial evidence demonstrated that Mr. Chauvin did taunt Mr. Floyd by responding dismissively to his pleas. The video evidence presented at trial captures Mr. Chauvin dismissively responding, at least a couple of times in response to Mr. Floyd's pleas, and also commenting in response to his pleas, quote, I can't breathe, end quote, that, quote, it takes a heck of a lot of oxygen to say things, end quote. Mr. Chauvin also notes that the officers, not him, Mr. Chauvin, because remember, he's supposed to be the training officer here. Mr. Chauvin also notes that the officers had called for an ambulance and upgraded the urgency of the request during the course of their restraint of Mr. Floyd. While true, that argument ignores the evidence that Mr. Chauvin disregarded 2 inquiries from Mr. Lane about rolling Mr. Floyd onto his side in the recovery position that anybody who has ever been given CPR training knows about. Anybody that has ever done CPR training knows about rolling over people into a recovery position if they can't breathe, or they're unresponsive, or if they've had a seizure. Roughly halfway through the restraint period after he had concluded that Mr. Floyd had passed out. So it was obvious that he was unconscious. So there was no danger. Because you can make the case that Mr. Floyd wasn't a danger once he was on his face, on his chest, on the ground, already cuffed. He was no danger to himself or anyone else at that point. Okay? But we are talking about after he had passed out, ignored the information from Mr. Kuhn that he was unable to detect a pulse at roughly 8:26 p.m. and ignored the repeated pleas from several of the onlookers, not the unruly mob, including Donald Williams, who was the MMA expert, the actual fighter, because you know when you choke somebody, the referee tells you to get off immediately, seconds after they tap or they fall unconscious. The referee will subdue you so that that other man could get oxygen, so that when the fight's over, the fight's over. This guy continued to do what he was doing after the rookie, the guy with the least amount, because I think this was like his 4th day on the job, Mr. Kuhn, that he was unable to detect the pulse at roughly 8:26 and ignored the repeated pleas from several of the onlookers, including Donald Williams, the MMA guy, and Genevieve Hansen, the off-duty firefighter, among others, over several minutes, that Mr. Floyd was no longer breathing and had become non-responsive. Rather than ending the restraint when it was obvious that Mr. Floyd was not only no longer offering any resistance, but was in medical distress and starting CPR, Mr. Chauvin instead chose to continue to restrain Mr. Floyd, as he had since Mr. Floyd was initially restrained prone on Chicago Avenue at 8:19 p.m. for several additional minutes until the EMS crew rolled Mr. Floyd onto a stretcher at 8:28:42 p.m. 9 minutes and 27 seconds. Now, number 4, the presence of children. The reason why he didn't get more of a sentence here is because the underage people were not being held hostage and forced to watch. They stayed there on their own volition. Some of them were actually laughing, I think, as a defensive mechanism, because they couldn't believe that they were witnessing what they were witnessing. Okay? So he was not dinged for what he did doing it in the presence of children, because they were free to leave at any point, and they were never coerced or forced by him or any of the other officers to remain a captive presence at the scene. Okay? So there was no reason to use that as an aggravating factor in this case. In other situations, children were locked indoors with the offender, of the crime. The guy who's committed the offense, they were stuck in an inside environment. So, they were not forced to watch. So that was not a part of his crime. Okay? Mr. Chauvin's actions as one of a group of 4 Minneapolis police officers actively participating in the restraint of George Floyd is not being used as substantial and compelling reason for an upward durational departure under the particular circumstances of this case. Let me make sure I got this right. Because they did say all right, so the court did say 4 out of 5, but two of the 5 are not being factored in, because while the presence of children is an aggravated sentencing factor and a permissible ground for departure for purposes of the first stage of analysis, under the second stage of analysis, meaning that yes, there were kids there, but no, they were not forced to be there. The court didn't find that his sentence should be upped on the ground that children were present, and because of what he did as a group. For whatever reason, the court found that his actions as one of a group of 4 Minneapolis police officers actively participating in the restraint of George Floyd is not being used as a substantial and compelling reason for an upward durational departure under the particular circumstances of this case. So even though he was doing this crime with other people, basically there was a lot of legal mumbo jumbo, and they were kind of playing around with the words, whether or not persons or offenders are interchangeable in this context. So I would probably say, if I'm really looking at like they said, it was not proven at trial that these officers did any wrongdoing because their trial has not even begun yet. So we can't say that it was a gang, like a gang style thing. So as this court has already found 2 particularly serious bases for an aggravated durational departure, abuse of a position of trust and authority and particular cruelty, the court need not wade into this morass of conflicting law on this issue. So they didn't want to get into the whole legal mumbo jumbo of an offender versus a person versus a this or a that. It was like, we're not even going to get into this. We already have enough. Okay? The appropriate prison sentence is 270 months. And they go on to explain exactly why. Not because of Antifa or Black Lives Matter. Okay? When a sentencing trial court has found that one or more aggravated factors are present, the court may, in the exercise of its discretion, if substantial and compelling circumstances warrant, impose a sentence that is up to double the presumptive sentence length. And in this case, the presumptive sentence length, the median would be 12 and a half years. Okay? The existence of a single aggravating factor is sufficient to justify the imposition of a sentence double the upper limit of the presumptive range. So, the upper limit is 180 months. So, only one of those factors, and you could have given him 30 years because he hit only one of those factors. Okay? We have affirmed upward durational departures that were based on a single aggravating factor in State v. Gaines in Minnesota, 1987, finding double upward departure appropriate where only one aggravating factor applied. So they have case law to back them up. Not Antifa, not Black Lives Matter, but actual court cases in the state of Minnesota, 1981, 2016, 1987. Here, the state is asking that the court sentence him to 360 months, which represents a double upward durational departure from the maximum or the top of the box of the presumptive guidelines range of 180 months. Determining the appropriate length of any felony sentence is not a mathematical calculation, nor should it be a reflexive doubling of the presumptive sentence once aggravating factors are proven and shown by the court to be substantial and compelling. Each sentence should be an application of the law to the facts of the individual case without regard to, and let's highlight this right here, sympathy, bias, passion, or public opinion. While every case is different and must be considered carefully and individually, examination of sentences imposed in similar cases is also relevant if the court is to effectuate the Minnesota sentencing guidelines policy of reducing sentence disparity. So basically what they're saying is, if we have to give these sentences to the black guy, we also have it the black civilian, we also have to give this sentence to the white police officer. That's pretty much what they're saying, okay? Attached to this memorandum is Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission data from the last 10 years analyzing aggravated durational departures imposed throughout Minnesota for murder in the second degree, unintentional killing during a felony. The data shows that of all of the sentences imposed, 67% were in the presumptive guidelines range. For a defendant with a criminal history score of 0, which is Mr. Chauvin's score, the guidelines sentence is, and has been since 2005, 150 months with a presumptive range of 128 months to 180 months. Any sentence within that range is not a departure. Okay? Now, they've said that they have found for upward departure because of aggravating circumstances of the crime. For all cases where sentences are imposed, 20% of the sentences were aggravated durational departures and 13% were mitigated durational departures, i.e. departures imposing an aggravated durational departure is generally limited to double the presumptive sentence. With the guidelines applicable in this case, anything from 256 to 360 months would be considered a double departure, with the limitation imposed by Evans Jackson at 360 reaffirming the Evans rule, despite the expansion of guidelines ranges in 2005. So 256 would be double 128. All of us tech people know what that is. And 360 is double 180. The purpose of the sentencing guidelines is to establish rational and consistent sentencing standards that promote public safety, reduce sentencing disparity, and ensure that the sanctions imposed for felony convictions are proportional to the severity of the conviction offense and the offender's criminal history. The data covers years 2010 to 2019 because 2020 data is not yet available. The most common aggravated sentence has been 240 months, followed by 300 months. The average aggravated departure imposed on defendants with 0 criminal history is a score of 278.2 months. So that's the average, okay? Drilling deeper into the actual cases, there are only 2 cases where the defendant's criminal history score is 0, and both abuse of a position of trust or authority and particular cruelty were cited as aggravating factors. Unlike the instant case, however, those cases involve particularly vulnerable victims, specifically 3-year-old children. The defendant in this other case was originally charged with murder in the first degree and pleaded guilty to murder in the second degree. So he pleaded down to this. Because he probably was going to either get the death penalty or worse, or life in prison without the possibility of parole. But then you have they agreed to 300 to 420 months, and they settled on 384. In the other case, the defendant pleaded guilty to the charge with an agreed upon sentence of 300 months. In both cases, the cruelty inflicted on the children was horrific, even more severe than the cruelty inflicted on Mr. Floyd. So Mr. Chauvin did not plead guilty, but he cannot be punished for exercising his constitutional right to a jury trial. Nevertheless, he must be held accountable for the death of Mr. Floyd, and for doing so in a manner that was particularly cruel and an abuse of his authority. In consideration of all of the facts presented at trial, this court's experience, and the collective experience of the entire court over the last 10 years, the court finds the appropriate prison sentence for Mr. Chauvin is 270 months. In conclusion, part of the mission of the Minneapolis Police Department is to give citizens, quote, voice and respect, end quote. Here, Mr. Chauvin, rather than pursuing the Minneapolis Police Department mission, treated Mr. Floyd without respect and denied him the dignity owed to all human beings, and which he certainly would have extended to a friend or neighbor. In the court's view, 270 months, which amounts to an additional 10 years over the presumptive 12 and a half years, is the appropriate sentence.
So what do you think overall, sentencing wise? Because there's a lot to digest.
I feel overwhelming sadness for two reasons. Reading the sentencing memo gave me flashbacks of the still photos that I saw of that murder that occurred in May 2020. Highly distressing for me. And another thing that makes me sad is that long after Derek Chauvin was found guilty of second-degree murder, which in the court, in Minneapolis court, the statute that they filed that under was unintentional murder in the commission of a felony. To have somebody come into my stream and then tell me that I was not paying attention and that I needed to look at the trial after Derek Chauvin had already been found guilty of the crime and had every one of his superiors testify that that is not how they're trained. To have bystanders testify that basically he continued to kneel on this man's dead body. And to have people write off the torture that he endured as, well, you know, he used drugs and he has a criminal record. As if we're not all imperfect human beings and don't all have the same rights to human decency. That is distressing to me.
I think you, regardless of what he did outside, let's just. I think you can't go into history, right? Like, I think if you just look into what happened, it more than justifies the sentencing, and like he shouldn't be a free man by any stretch of the imagination. You can go and have that discussion. Like, is George Floyd? Would you say George Floyd's a saint? No, absolutely not. But
well, he was actually honored by his local police department in Texas, where he's from. He was honored by them for the community service that he did down there. He was honored by their police department. So he worked very hard to try to wash away, because I think that he assaulted a pregnant woman or threatened a pregnant woman.
He put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach.
Yeah, and he paid his debt to society.
He paid his dues.
He tried to become a better person after that, to the point where even his local police department gave him props and kudos for the work that he was trying to do in his community, so that other young men coming up wouldn't do the kind of things that he did in his youth.
Mm-hmm.
We all make mistakes. We're all imperfect.
Not everyone makes not
everybody makes those mistakes.
Let's
settle down think there. About it. But he had the choice to be even more of a fucking prick douchebag, right? He had a choice to be that or to be better.
Right.
And if you're a man that has the capability of putting a gun to a pregnant woman's belly, it is very easy to continue to slide down. But no, he didn't do that. When he went to prison, he could have learned how to be a better criminal. But no, he didn't choose to do that. He chose to become a better man and become a family man. That's what he chose to do. It's easy for me and you, who have never committed crimes like that. It's easier for us to stay away from that stuff. It's easier to never do drugs if you've never done drugs.
I get that, but at the same time, I think it's pretty easy not to fucking put a gun at someone. You know, I get it. I get what you're saying.
No. I'm not talking about that. That's not what I'm pointing that thought at. What I'm saying is, after he did that, he could have continued to do more things like that, where it's easier to continue to do things like that. After you've done something like that, it's easier to continue doing fucked up things when you go that far. For me and you, who have never gone that far, we've never stepped over that line, it's easier to keep from stepping over that line. But for somebody who had already stepped over that line, he could have gone to prison and become a better criminal. Instead, he used that time to try to become a better man instead. And I think that is something that we should be pushing for. We should be pushing for rehabilitation of inmates like they do in the Scandinavian countries. So Jimmy Dean, let's talk about the counterfeit bill. Okay? Let's talk about this, because there is no but here. Do you know how counterfeit bills? Do you know why counterfeit bills are made? And do you know who uses counterfeit bills? Do you know anything about counterfeiting of legal tender anywhere in the world? I'm going to explain this to you so you have an idea about counterfeit bills, okay? And Xenon is on the right track with this, okay? The people who make the counterfeit bills, they never use the counterfeit bills. What they do is they have a set rate at which they will sell the counterfeit bills for. Okay? No, drug dealers do not make counterfeit bills. Okay? That's not how it works. It's a separate criminal enterprise. Sometimes you will get gangs that will get involved in them, but the fact of the matter is, it is very difficult to pass counterfeit bills with today's notes because there's added security. So it's very, very sophisticated. The counterfeiting is very, very, very sophisticated. Okay, so the counterfeiter will sell the counterfeit bills pennies on the dollar in exchange for real money. They may sell it for, they may sell, let's say they made $1 million worth of fake 10s or 20s.
Mm-hmm.
They may sell that money. They may have like $1 million in fake and funny money. They may sell it for, 300,000 or 500,000. It's going to be a percentage of the actual money that is being represented on the funny money.
Right.
And then what the people will do is that they will get rid of that funny money and try to get it into circulation by any means necessary to get it away from them so that it doesn't come back to them. And the only way that counterfeiting still works as a profitable criminal venture is that the money cannot be easily recognized by the person holding the money. Mm-hmm. A counterfeiter would not go to the store to buy anything with a counterfeit $10 bill. They are getting rid of those bills in stacks to get it away from them so that it gets dumped into the circulation of money and gets mixed in with actual real money, so it becomes even more difficult to tell whether or not the bill is fake.
Yo, funny story. I actually got a counterfeit bill once. I got a counterfeit 20. I had to be about 16 at the time. And I actually got a counterfeit. I don't necessarily recall where I got it from. I think it was from I went to get a drink or something. But then I went to the bank, right, to put the rest of my money in the account because I was working underneath the table somewhere. And dude, it turned into this whole situation where a cop showed up, stuff like, where'd you get this from? I was like from the local store down the street. Like, I don't know. And because I remember I had to break. No, I think it actually was a 10 because I had to break it. Yeah, I had to break a 20. And I get the 10 back, and I'm like, I go down. This was a couple days later. I'm like, yeah, I went to get a Gatorade down the street, and it turned into this whole big production. So it's not like someone's walking around with a whole briefcase full of fucking counterfeits and trying to put it in.
No, that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. That's not how they get into circulation. The only reason that counterfeit even got caught was because of it went to a bank. So, I just remember that going to the credit union, and I was like, what the fuck? And it just turned into this whole production. Bank manager had to talk to them, had to talk to cops, had to make a statement.
Yeah.
So, and gangs do get involved in counterfeiting, right? But it's a very nuanced, very, very nuanced,
because
very interesting.
There's a preciseness that you have to have because the paper that is printed on is very special. Mm-hmm. The ink that is used is super special. You've got they have these different watermarks and strips and all this other stuff. It is an expensive thing to get into. It takes a certain kind of preciseness in what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's really important. Is where does it get dumped? It gets dumped in the local economy. Their job is to get it into the hands of as many people, spread as far as possible, to mix it in with real money. That is how they do that.
Like I said, bro, at the convenience store down the street, bro, I remember it was like fucking, it's now a Speedway, but it was a 7-Eleven down the street, bro. I worked out after playing a rink, walked up the street for a couple miles.
And they know that most people are not going to check for that stuff, right?
No,
especially not a $10 bill.
No, not a $10 bill, and that's how they because they exchange that 10 for, oh, can you break this up? You know what I mean? Can you break, you know what I mean? They'll break it. Oh, can you give me 2 5s? That's how they make money. It's a very kind of it's interesting. There's actually some documentaries that you should look up on YouTube about the whole counterfeiting process. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
So because I obviously it's all doctrine. I don't want to get off too off tangent here, but yeah, it's listen, a $20 or $10 counterfeit bill. It does not that force it just come on, that's nowhere equate. You could have a conversation, something like that. And as for the fentanyl in his system, who knows? He could have been doped up on drugs, whatever. Still doesn't excuse the behavior as an officer, because as an officer, you are held to a higher standard. As much as some people that, oh, thin blue line, back to blue, all that stuff. I do support officers, but I support the good ones, the ones that do their jobs the proper way. You don't want to be, there's a special privilege with that badge and the way you carry yourself. And Chauvin proved that he's not up to that mantle, or behind, he's just not. He does not deserve to wear the badge. And anyone that with that type of ill intent, somebody with that lack of self-awareness, lack of empathy, right, doesn't deserve to wear a badge. So right, I don't want to hear it. Go ahead.
Yeah, but this is what I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear he wasn't an angel because, he was addicted to drugs and he had a counterfeit bill. So by that standpoint, you're not an angel because you got caught with a $10 bill that was counterfeit, right? It happened to you. It's happened to Jimmy Dean. It can happen to anybody, right? But also we need to understand something too about drug abuse and addiction. Do you know how he became addicted to fentanyl? Because his partner, his wife, testified how they both became addicted to opioids.
So like,
look at me, I am the counterfeit now. Yes.
But
yes, it was prescribed, not the fentanyl, but the painkillers, the opioid painkillers that they were just writing people scripts for. He had a back injury. And what they don't warn you is that it is habit forming. And recently I recognized, we might have covered it on the show.
We did.
But because black people
we did
don't
cover that.
produce the same amount of vitamin D as white people because of the melanated skin, they are more susceptible to becoming addicted to drugs than white people given that they're in the same geography and in the same circumstance, because if a white person goes out into the sun, their skin is going to convert UVB rays into vitamin D. And what they've found is, and they've done this test in rodents, that those that have that are vitamin C deficient are more susceptible to becoming addicted to opioids.
And I think, and it's interesting too, because as I don't know if you knew this, but when I was up in school up in Maine, like it's actually still to this day. In fact, like Lewiston, Maine has a huge opioid issues, right? And a big just ravaging through their communities. And it's a big thing. It's a big problem because people get addicted to these things and they don't realize the repercussions. I think as a whole, opioids need to be dealt with in a better manner than they were dealt with and still currently are dealt with.
Oh, they got a couple of $1 billion fines, a couple of $500 million, $200 million fines.
But
they made billions and billions and billions and billions.
Exactly. The money will never replace the pain and the devastation it brought into the community.
But it also won't take away the profits that those organizations made.
No, exactly.
The lives of all those people.
100%. And I guess like for me, when it comes to Floyd, when I say the angel, the counterfeit, I don't give a shit about that, if I'm being honest with you. Yeah. So thing was
anybody could be addicted to opiates, and
my thing is
saddled with a counterfeit bill.
My thing is the physical violence, right? That's the only thing I really even care about if you're going to talk about, like, because I don't care if someone has a record of like distributing fucking like weed or what. I don't care. I don't care.
I think I mostly agree with you on that.
So like for me is like, it comes down to the physical violence, and he had a little bit of a track record of it, but I just think regardless of whatever his history is, there's a certain protocol you should go by, and he didn't go by it.
It's called humanity,
right? And I think it's pretty heartless when you have a guy saying like, "Oh man, I can't breathe," and officer saying, "It doesn't have a pulse." He's still on the neck. It's just like the lack of empathy in that moment, like. If it was, let me just put it this way. If it was me, you, or you, Jimmy Jean, no badge, no nothing, we'd be gone for life, most likely. Let's just call it out. Absolutely. We'd be gone for life. So,
Jimmy Jean is not my love.
My biggest problem when it comes to officers is there needs to be accountability. right? I get it. It's a very difficult job. There's some very split decisions you have to make in certain
Yeah,
circumstances.
but that was not a split
But
decision.
exactly, but circumstances like that where you had that one lady officer breaking into the wrong apartment, dude eating ice cream kills him.
Yeah.
You have a case like this where he's on the neck and he's, for an excessive amount of
Get out
time.
of prison. She's gonna get out of prison 5 years for murder.
Exactly, and I think that's not commendable because if that was either me or you, we'd be gone for life. And
let me ask you a question: if that was a black man that broke into a white woman's apartment, do you think that her being the victim, do you think her family would have been hugging and giving him a Bible, and then pleading for leniency in the sentencing?
Depends on the family. I don't want to get I don't want to make it like it's just a purely because I do know some very big Christians that would actually forgive that person. But
I'm saying on the balance of probabilities, what do you think is more likely to happen?
Like I said, it does depend on the background.
Black guy murders a white girl, busts into her apartment.
There's definitely a different
narrative. Ice cream.
There's definitely a different narrative
in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas,
there's definitely a different narrative push. But I get what you're saying to a degree. Yeah, I to a slight degree I agree. Like there wouldn't have been that showing of love. I get that, but at the same time, these officers, when you are in this position, you need to be far more responsible and far less trigger happy than you currently are. And I know that wasn't a trigger incident with Chauvin, but you need to be a little less cavalier in your actions and kind of think the whole process through and actually go back to your training. And that comes down to the whole police departments as a whole. A lot of them are undertrained. And we've had discussions about this on air. This is why I think they should make them like academy, like actual true academies, not the bullshit like for
They're talking about
a few
like
months.
A university.
Yes, like a 2 to 4 year program where they get mental evaluations. They go to the range, they get proper training, proper hand-to-hand combat. So when they're in certain situations, they're not so. The problem is a lot of cops aren't trained in hand-to-hand combat.
They need criminal justice degrees, like a bachelor in criminal justice or something like that.
Well, some of them get associates in it, and some of them even get bachelors. Yeah. They'll go to school and get.
I'm just saying that's something that we should require.
Yeah, no, it is definitely something we should require, but it's also in the academy, in these schools, it needs to be far better trained because a lot of these officers, the reason why they pull out their handguns is because they know when it comes to hands, they're not going to fucking win. So you need to, there should be just like it is in the military, there needs to be a better PT standard. There needs to be a better physical combat training. There's just an overhaul that needs to be happened so that they can condone themselves in a certain manner. Because how many cops have we seen on the beat that are fat as fuck, out of shape, don't know how to fucking handle their own weapon, don't even know how to fucking throw hands. And that dude, because he's terrified, will make a horrific decision. That like most of these unfortunate decisions and incidents that happen are because the cop is terrified for their life. And I feel like when I watch, and I'm this person. Well, but the thing is, I'm one of these people that I watch these like police body cams, whether the person was wrongfully murdered or it was justified, quote unquote. A lot of these cases, you'll see cops very calm in their demeanor, like they'll use it as a very, very last resort. But then you'll see others like, boom, boom, boom. Like there was that one woman cop that thought she had a taser, she had a handgun, shot him in the fucking few rounds in the chest and killed him. Because to me, that just signifies that poor training, and that's a whole different discussion about women being out on the beat. That's a whole different discussion I could have for a different video. But that being said,
they ain't gonna like what we have to say about that.
No, they're not. So, but that being said, man, like Chauvin, he overstepped his boundaries. He showed a lack of empathy, and honestly, he should have got longer. He should have got longer.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that I think that the sentence was appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a case that could be made for life without the possibility of parole. And there's only one case that I could make for that. And that is because there is a particular unfeeling nature of how he approached the actual situation and how he approached the trial a lot of the things that he said during the trial leads me to believe that he's a sociopath.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that he did so. They gave him second-degree murder for unintentional killing during the commission of a felony. I believe personally, and this is just me, folks. This is not anything official, but I believe that he did intend to kill him. I believe that that's what he intended. I believe that there was a prior relationship between George Floyd and Derek Chauvin because they both did security at a nightclub, and they did not have an amicable professional relationship. So there was already some heat between the two of them prior to this incident.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I thought that there was a chance that, if they got everybody on the stand, and I mean everybody, because maybe some people didn't want to talk, but if they had gotten everybody on the stand, then he would have been looking at first-degree murder. So
that would actually kind of make sense because of the excessive amount.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That actually...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually kind of crazy.
But the thing is that, I definitely wanted to know more about this. And the thing is that he continued to kneel on this man 2.5 minutes after another officer recognized George Floyd as not only being incapacitated, not only as being passed out, not only as being unresponsive, but dead. And he continued to kneel with no emotional, there was no urgency to him. There was nothing about him that suggested that he was a human being and that he valued the life of another human being. There was nothing there that told me. Because even in his own defense, he tried to say, well, there was an ambulance call, priority, but it wasn't called by you. And you're trying to use that to defend you? No, it was your rookie officer. You had two rookie officers that are saying, hey, guy, I know that you're the training officer and you're the senior one here. And, we're supposed to listen to you and defer to you. But even we think this is ridiculous, guy.
Yeah.
And now these guys may go to prison for what he did.
Yeah.
Which is why the Asian officer and the other rookie, I've gone on record of saying that I don't believe that they should get harsh sentences, even if they should get jailed at all. I think the worst that should happen to them is them just not being able to be police officers, because I think being a police officer requires a certain kind of courageousness that they just don't have.
I don't know, man. You'd have to really make a case for me. I think there should be some type of punishment, but I'm sorry. Like, maybe it's just how I've gone about things. I'm pulling them off. I'm like, yo, enough. Like, enough. Like, that's, I get it. Yo, the rookies.
Think about you on the boat. Think about you on the boat, though, right? If you're the deckhand and you see the captain doing some shit and you're out on the seas, how quick are you going to be to step to him?
Very quick.
Nose to nose.
Very quick. I've done it before. Because there's been incidents. See, what we have in our
that's
work.
That's why you're my co-host.
we have a workplace thing where it was funny. Okay. I'm not going to name names for a company I work for.
Obviously.
So we work on tugboats, and he was towing by a wire. This was not a captain I normally worked with. The guy I normally worked with had 40, 50 years experience. He was fucking amazing. But this guy I worked with, relatively new. And I'll be honest with you, bro. He put us in a dangerous situation where we were going to trip the barge. And I was like, bro, what the fuck are you doing? He's like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I was like, bro, no, fucking cut this shit. I was like, what the, I reacted pretty negatively. But I just think one of the things is, in those moments, now, mind you, me and him got into a screaming match on the dock. And then I told my higher up what happened, and they saw the footage and they took my side because I did something I shouldn't have done. I took control of the wheel to straighten out the tug, because if not, we would have capsized and I would probably be dead. So, we have some of these fucking idiots out here that you need to take to task. I don't give a fuck if I don't give a fuck about your rank. I don't. If you are doing something detrimental to my health or someone else's health, I'm gonna call you out on your bullshit. I'm sorry. That's why I get it. I have some sympathy in the aspect that they're beta male bitches, that they couldn't step in and actually do something.
They're also
And
like fucking. I mean, one of them had been on the force like 2 or 3 or 4 days or something.
Listen, bro. I don't give a fuck. I don't because there's just some self awareness. Like, yo, bro. Like, I'd grab him by the back, like, and shoulder. Yo, chill, bro. He's obviously restrained. Calm the fuck down. Like, it's to me. Yeah, I'm looking at hindsight 2020. I'm looking at hindsight 2020, bro. But I've been in those situations where you're like, yo, enough. We done here. I guess I'm not. I don't have that empathy. Oh, because they're new on the force. Oh my god. Like, shut the. Like, I just want to. I hate that defense because it's like if you're just looking at it a human being. Like, I get it. Maybe you're in shock for the first couple minutes. I'll give you that benefit of a few minutes, but you're just sitting there just watching it, and like you're making comments. Oh, dude, he's like, oh, dude. Like, dude, if I had, like, oh, he has no pulse, I would have grabbed that fucking officer off him, threw him off that dude, and would have done my resuscitation.
Right.
Like,
and I respect that, but I also believe in this too. On the flip side. Like, I respect what you're saying, and you've got a track record of doing this kind of stuff. But I'm just going to say that all of us want to believe that we're going to do the courageous thing when the shit hits the fan. But the fact of the matter is that people freeze much more often than they leap.
That's true. And that's fair. That's very fair.
And that's why I'm very hesitant to say these guys should go to prison for what they did, and they're guilty of aiding and abetting murder. I think that these guys were as shocked at what they were seeing as anybody else. So for me, I would actually have to see how their trials go. I need to see how that because I think they may all be tried together, or if they're tried separately. I'd have to look at it, and then at the evidence being presented, at that point, I would then say whether or not I believe that they deserve some kind of jail time. But as I sit right now, knowing what I know, which is not a whole lot, I'm not just letting them off the hook. From what I've seen, I'm not comfortable.
No, and I'm not saying to the full, like, to the same punishment as Chauvin, but there's got to be some type of culpability here. I agree. They should never be on the force again.
Yeah.
Wholly agree with that, but there should be
any
some type
force. Because a lot of these guys get fired, they end up on another force.
Yeah, no, like literally stripped
even
of
after
any
killing
right.
people.
Yeah.
They end up on another force.
And that's a whole different discussion we can get into. But I know that we can have really good conversations. We'll follow this through. With them, but I know you got to probably start skedaddling here soon. But like, we felt like when we made this podcast, right, very precipice of it, me and Evil were having very real discussions like this, and it's uncomfortable at times, but sometimes you need to be okay with that uncomfortableness to have a real discussion.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that we want to do here on this channel is definitely, help build up men. And, my takeaway is this, guys, is that if you are in a situation that is detrimental to your health or others, and you could do something to step in, if it's like somebody of your employees, somebody friend or whatever, so a higher up, even if you get fired, even if you get, I don't know, find type of discipline, just do the right thing. Because a lot of the times everything will kind of come out even in the wash. Not always, because the world's not a fair place, but
unless a man's neck is being kneeled on and you're not a police officer, because a police officer will just pull out a gun and shoot you and you'll be dead.
That's true.
There is there's no benefit to being dead.
No, but I'll say in certain situations, like with your coworkers, or if your boss is doing something improper, incorrect, or dangerous to you, you need to address that situation properly as a man, and don't be afraid to take that stance. Because at the end of the day, yeah, it would suck being fired from a job or losing a job, but you have to realize
that than losing your life.
Exactly.
Or someone else losing their life on your watch, because you'll be haunted by that forever.
Exactly.
So going forward, I'm not going to be addressing the George Floyd murder trial in the future. What I'll do is, if anybody wants to reference it, just go back to the Talkin Shit podcast episode 21. I'm just going to refer you to that because I made very sure to go through the entire memo from the judge, not from me, not from my view of it, but from the judge and from the prosecutors and from the expert testimony and from the witnesses and from the video evidence and from the actions of the other officers that even they figured out, you know what, this is a bit much. He's non-responsive. And, oh yeah, he doesn't even have a pulse. So his blood is no longer circulating. Yeah, I think he's dead. Okay. So going forward, we're not going to allow people to come onto our platform and spew bullshit about this particular case. Okay? If you want to talk that I support Derek Chauvin shit, I'm just going to refer you to this very episode. We've been here more than 2 hours. We've discussed it at length. I went through the judge's memo in its entirety. There is no question as to the guilt of Derek Chauvin and the severity of his crimes. Period. So we are not going to really address this. I'm just going to tell you guys to come back here. We will be back here on Wednesday talking some other shit about some other shit. I want to talk about how you can protect yourself from swiping right on the wrong girl. Okay? So I'm going to help you guys with some game. We're going to decode some womanese. Shout out to Alpha Male Strategies for that terminology. Anything else from you, Captain Paul?
I think I felt like I said pretty much everything I wanted to. Just make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Twitch, follow us there. Follow us on our socials. Links will be down below.
And share. Because you guys are loyal viewers. We need to get other people to hear what we have to say because what we have to say is important. And the reason why what we have to say is important